Okay, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Northern Regional Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the Weber County Commission chambers, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. This RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. It's why we're here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion at today's meeting to fill out a comment card. I want to turn those into Jody over here. And we expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that do not align with their own. Respectful behavior helps facilitate efficient meetings where RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior includes booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking. You can also help to maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors of their physical characteristics, demeanor, or gender. If this behavior occurs, the RAC chair will remind attendees to be respectful. If the behavior continues, the applicable individual will be asked to leave. Lastly, please help reduce distractions during the meeting by putting your phone on silent. If you need to take a call, we ask that you step outside. And one last order of business, we've been asked when the meeting is over to please exit out the front doors to the west here tonight. Okay. I'd like to welcome our RAC members who are here today. Let's go around and do a brief introduction. Start over here with Robert.
My name is Rob Dale, and I represent the public at large.
My name is Emily Timer. I'm representing the Bureau of Land Management.
Hi, I'm Jamie Butler. I represent non-consumptive users.
Ross Worthington, Ross Worthington, public at large.
We do have, I think, one online. Casey.
Yep, Casey Snyder, elected official.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Brad Buchanan representing Sportsman. We would like to excuse James Carlson, Junior Goring, Darren Perry, Nikki Wayman, and David Earl from tonight's meeting. I'd like to welcome the DWR staff, specifically those that provide presentations and are available to answer questions throughout this meeting. Dax Mangus, Rusty Robinson, Chad Wilson, Kobe Jones, Melissa Early, and Zach Ullman. We would like to welcome the public that are attending in person and that are also watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out the comment card for the item you wish to address and see that we receive it prior to the RAC discussion. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members for this meeting. Okay, with that, let's start. First item of business will be approval of the agenda and minutes from the last meeting. Mike's on. We're going to have a motion by Randy to approve the agenda for tonight and the minutes from the past meeting. We have a second?
A second.
Seconded. Okay. We'll go by raise of hand on this one. Okay. Casey? Motion passes unanimous. Okay. All right. Go to a recap from the last board meeting, which was back in January. So the first motion that was made was to approve the waterfowl recommendations for 2025 to 2027, and that passed unanimously. Also had a motion to approve the falconry reporting requirement recommendations. That passed unanimously. On the Utah Black Bear Management Plan, had a motion to add 3 multi-season tags to the Cache Ogden unit, and that passed unanimously. Also had a motion to allow the multi-season permit holders to hunt during the spot and stock season if they are unsuccessful, and to not count the harvest against the harvest quota. That passed 4-1. We had a motion to ask the division to look at the possibility of bear baiting during harvest objective on private lands, and to include the possibility of additional public opportunities. This was to be placed on the action log. That passed unanimously. And had a motion to approve the remainder of the recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously. For the cougar recommendations, had a motion to approve the Utah cougar recommendations and Rule 657-10 as presented by the division. That passed unanimously. For the fur bearer recommendations, a motion to approve as presented. That passed unanimously. The coyote bounty rule amendments. Had a motion to approve the coyote bounty rule amendments as presented. That passed unanimously. For the shed antler gathering recommendations, had a motion to approve as presented, and that passed unanimously. And finally, the last motion was to approve the West Desert Complex management plan, and as presented, and that passed unanimously as well. Oh, 2 more, sorry. Also had a motion to approve prohibited species variance request as presented by the division. That passed unanimously. And for the restricted muzzleloader definition clarification, the motion was to approve as presented, and that passed unanimously. Any questions on the last board meeting? Good, because I don't really remember it. So move on to regional update. Blair? Okay. No regional update for tonight. Okay. We will start with our first agenda item. Agenda item number 4, taking big game rule amendments, R657-5 with DAX.
Hey, Mr. Chair, members of the RAC, happy to be here with you tonight. I had everything put up on my computer, and then it just did the emergency, you must restart your computer right now thing. So, but happy to answer any questions, and I'll put my presentation back up in case I need to refer to it. But yeah, let me know how you'd like to proceed.
Okay. We'll start off with questions from RAC members. Okay. Questions from the public? This is starting off great. Okay.
We might be done before it was supposed to start.
Fantastic. All right. Okay. Let's summarize public comments. This agenda item.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we had 2 comments on this agenda item. Actually, we had 6 responses on this agenda item. So half of those people strongly agreed with the recommendation. 33% were neutral and 17 disagreed. That gives us a weighted average of 3.7. Then there were 2 comments on the item. One of them was specific to spinal columns. There was just some confusion about why that's important for CWD. And then one comment that was completely kind of outside this discussion, just someone frustrated about the cash restricted weapons on.
Okay, thank you. Don't have any comment or public comment cards on this agenda item, so open it up for RAC discussion. Okay. Entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve as presented the Taking Big Game Rule R657-5 amendments.
Motion by Robert. We have a second.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Okay. Call for a vote. Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, agenda item number 5, Deer Permit Recommendations for 2025. Still with DAX.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we jump into this one, just a little reminder, and I've had conversations with some folks about this, but as you might remember, last fall, last November, and then in December, it was approved by the Wildlife Board. We enacted a new statewide mule deer management plan. And this recommendation cycle this spring represents the first cycle under this new plan that was approved by the board. With regard to deer permits, especially buck permits, one of the things that we have struggled with since for a long time probably, since we went to unit by unit deer hunting back in 2012 is in Utah, we just love our deer so much. We sometimes have a hard time following the plans that we decide we're going to follow just because we're so close to these units and we care so much about our deer. And so one of the things we tried to implement in this new plan is kind of to tie our hands behind our backs to a certain extent to let these to actually manage to the plans. And so we put some sideboards in that statewide plan that the division would just automatically adjust deer permits that were only changed within 20% of last year's number. So if the change was 20% or less, we're just going to follow the data, follow the, how we come up with our permit calculations based on the model that we use, the data that we collect. And this represents the first cycle of that. And I don't know if it was presented super clearly in the RAC packet, in the presentations, tried to differentiate between what's a recommendation versus what is a change, an automatic adjustment that we're just going to make based on the plan that the board approved and has directed the division to follow. It doesn't mean we can't maybe have some conversation, some discussion about those units or those permit numbers, but I think ultimately those aren't what we're voting on and not what we're asking the board to vote on. We're trying to follow the direction from the board and implement those changes. So I don't want to, say that we're not willing to talk about those things, but there's a lot on the agenda tonight and we probably should spend the bulk of our time talking on the things that we're actually going to vote on and decide whether or not we implement. And I realize this is probably kind of hard to do, especially because we just, like I said, in Utah, we just love our deer so much. And we've tried it the other way for a dozen years, and maybe it's time to try it a little bit differently for a few years and see how it goes. And if folks really don't like it, I think the direction to give the division and the Wildlife Board would probably be to look at a plan revision and ask us to change the plan and do it differently. But I'm hoping we can give it a shot for a few years and see how it goes. So, and with that, we'll jump in.
Thank you. Start with questions from RAC members.
So actually, I thought of something when you said that. How long is the plan?
6 years.
6 years. And I'm okay with that. I think that's going to be a hard thing, but I think that'll be a good thing. And so I actually had a question on something in your presentation, and I'm going to mispronounce it. I believe it's the 30 permits down in Lyton.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. I don't remember when the deer plan came through last year. I don't remember this specific clause coming up that you have to deliver it. I'm not going to lie. I have a problem with just giving a bunch of tags to some landowners. And the way I understand it is their tags to do whatever they want, correct?
That's the recommendation. Yep.
I struggle with that as much as, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but as much as I despise House Bill 202 that passed this year, this reeks of the same thing to me. I understand the reasoning for doing it, but I really dislike that that's being done.
I understand where you're coming from.
Dax, I think you touched on it in the presentation and maybe just my own wrap my head around this. With the shift in the buck to doe ratios on the Henrys, Paunsaugunt to a little bit lower, what it appears to be is we have a slight increase on the Henrys, and then we added the management hunt. We trying to utilize the management hunt to bring us into the buck to doe ratio more than adding the premium permits. Is that the thought process, or am I wrong in that?
Yeah, so it's actually a slight decrease in the premium limited entry permits on the Henrys. It's a slight decrease. The overall permit numbers go up, but more, we haven't had a management buck hunt on the Henrys for a few years now. And so, yeah, the idea is, even though we're lowering the buck to doe ratio slightly, well, or moving it to the bottom end of the range that we previously, it was 40 to 55 bucks per 100 does. Plus we had an age component in there. In this new version of the plan, it's 40 to 45. So it's a truncated buck to doe ratio objective. It's lower than it was. The top end is lower than it was previously. And we took out the age component, but we did say in the plan that we would have management buck permits make up 20% of the total number of permits issued on those units. And the idea behind that is, even though the buck to doe ratio, the top end of it anyways, is lower than it used to be, you could still perhaps harvest more bucks to get us to that lower top end of the buck to doe ratio objective, while still maintaining some of that quality that's typically been associated with the premium limited entry units for folks that put in for lots and lots of years or get really lucky to draw one of those permits and they're looking for, kind of an exceptional buck. So yeah, that's the idea there. So net for the Henrys, it is more permits than last year, but more of them are management buck permits and a little bit less are the premium limited entry permits.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yep. No, I
Can
had that backwards on the regular permits being decreased. So
Paunsaugunt wasn't increased, but the Henrys was a little cut. Yeah.
Can you explain management permit a little bit better for a newbie?
Yeah, for sure. So, and this is kind of interesting. Dr. Randy Larson from BYU presented and talked about this a little bit at the board work session yesterday. And part of this came from a paper published by a grad student at BYU, Eric Freeman. And they looked at this really big data set, looking at antler size and the correlation between antler size and age in deer and in elk. And it's looking at kind of on the Boone and Crockett scale, which is one system, a pretty commonly accepted system that folks use to, gauge the size of the antlers on a big buck or big bull. And most mule deer at kind of their peak antler size, they score 168 inches on the Boone and Crockett scale. And they typically reach that potential by age 5. A lot of hunters, especially on these really hard to draw premium limited entry units, they're looking for a buck that exceeds that. They're looking for an exceptional buck that, might be a 30-inch wide buck, or a buck that scores, 180, 190, 200 inches type of thing on the Boone and Crockett scale. And so if the average is 168, that means you also probably have, that's average. So it means you've got some of those exceptional bucks that are a lot bigger than that. But you probably also have a lot of bucks that the biggest they ever get, no matter how old they get or how good nutrition they have available, they're going to be a 130 buck or a 140 buck on the Boone and Crockett scale. And so what these management buck permits are designed to do are they allow a hunter to harvest the buck that has no more than 3 points on one side. A typical mule deer has 4 points and then also usually a brow tine. And so the management buck permits, the idea is that folks will harvest some of these mature bucks that have less desirable antler configurations. So they're allowed to harvest a buck that has less than 3 points, or sorry, less than 4 points on at least one side. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Jackson kind of talked or asked in passing, but has there been any discussion on just limited units, not the premium for management hunts? And I ask because just for context for public, I've talked to you, I had the Vernon tag last year, and there are, I couldn't count the number of trophy 2 points and 3 points running around on that unit. So if there's a limited entry unit that is exceeding that buck to door at that higher end, is there an opportunity there to run those hunts to try to improve?
So we've had some of those discussions. We talked about it in the last deer plan revision that was done last year, and ultimately kept it where we just have the management buck permits on the premium limited entry units. But I have heard that comment from folks for units like the Vernon or units like the Book Cliffs that maybe it'd be beneficial to have a management buck hunt on some of those units. And we haven't gone that direction. And right now, the way the plan is written, we don't have the option to have management buck hunts on just kind of our standard limited entry units. Maybe that's something to put on the list to talk about next time it comes around. And there's various reasons as to why we maybe haven't adopted that. Anytime you enact a point restriction, there have been, sometimes we have some negative experiences where folks end up shooting a buck that they think is legal on a management buck permit, and they walk up to it and it has a little sticker point that's 2.5 inches long sticking off the back of one of the tines, and now suddenly they've harvested an illegal buck, and it can be a little tricky. We have some enforcement issues occasionally, and there are a lot of hunters that also are happy to shoot a big 3x4 or a big 2x3 or something too. So I understand the desire for that on some of these other units, and ultimately we've had some discussions, but haven't gone that direction at this point.
Any other questions from RAC members? Okay. Any questions from the public? Okay. Blair, you want to summarize public comments on this one?
Yep. So for this agenda item, we had 10 responses. 20% of those strongly agreed, 10% were neutral, 20 somewhat disagreed, and 50% strongly disagreed. So I gave the weighted average of 2.2. We also had 7 comments. So to give you a little bit of insight into how those people had responded, there was a comment about concerns about deer population estimates and permit numbers. These were really specific to Morgan, South Ridge, Chalk Creek, East Canyon, and Camas. These are the units where we had the winter loss a couple of years ago, and so there's just concern about the population estimate as well as the permits, the recommendation numbers. We had concerns with the calf restricted weapons hunt and the potential for the number of permits there and potential wounding loss. There was a comment about wanting more tags on the cash limited entry muzzleloader hunt. And see, so that rec is a little bit lower than what was in the plan, so they had concerns there. There were concerns overall just about buck to doe ratios in general, kind of going back to the plan. Not really anything within our purview tonight, but just concerns about the 17 to 19 and 18 to 20 or 15 to 17. And then also, this may surprise you, but someone had commented on point restrictions as well and thought we should think about that. So.
Okay. Thank you. Move to public comment. We have 2 comment cards on this agenda item. Let's start with Garrett Slatkoff. I think I said that right. I hope so. Okay. And followed by Troy Justinson.
My name is Garrett Slatkoff, here representing the Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Our organization supports these proposed deer permit numbers. We look forward to the increased opportunity as long as the populations allow it. And I think the other thing that we would like to reiterate our support for is on the that 20% rule that Dax had mentioned here. Understanding that that isn't up for debate tonight, but I was fortunate enough to sit on that advisory council last year. That was something the council really talked about a lot. And as Dax mentioned, we did vote in support of that because we did believe that that's going to allow the biologists to better manage our deer population. So understand there may be some concern around that rule, but our organization is supportive of it and would like to see it followed out throughout the entirety of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Troy?
Good evening. Troy Justinson speaking on behalf of the SFW Fulfillment Award. We support the division's recommendation with three exceptions. The first of which is the Beaver West, where that is a new restricted weapons hunt down there. Our committee in the Beaver area felt like they'd like to start that out a little slow with 500 permits. I think the division recommended 1,500 on that. And then the other one was just, we talked about how much when it's in our backyard, it's extremely difficult to accept change. And so our Fillmore Creek would like to keep the permits what they were last year, and then also the San Juan unit as far as the limited entry goes. But other than that, we support all the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Okay. We'll open it up for RAC discussion.
I was just going to say, not really discussion, but I just appreciate the fact of trying to hold to the plan. It was really frustrating on the last mule deer plan that there was these targeted objectives, and yet we always managed above it. And I agree. The plan is not only 6 years, but I believe, if I remember correctly, 3 years into it, there's kind of a review to make any adjustments at that time frame. So I just appreciate the fact of being cognizant of making sure that we're following that, making recommendations off of that. I would, I guess, just follow on a question on that Beaver West. Like, I'm assuming counts, biologists, everything like that feel that there's sufficient deer on there to support those tags.
Yeah, and that's one. So the Beaver unit, we split that unit in half. It's divided kind of by I-15. The western half is the Mineral Mountains, Bald Mountains, has lower deer numbers, a little bit lower deer density than the eastern half of the Beaver. And with the change we made, the western half of the Beaver, I got to make sure I get my east and west right. So the stuff west of I-15, we now have a restricted rifle hunt and a restricted muzzleloader hunt. So it's different weapon types. You can't use any magnifying optics. Or any optics at all on a muzzleloader or rifle, and the muzzleloader is a little more restricted than what we use on other units. So the biologist went back through and looked at his classification data and tried to kind of break out proportionally about how many deer he was seeing on the Beaver West side versus the Beaver East side. And to be totally honest, to be totally fair, we had not been collecting data on that unit at the scale that we would and that we will moving forward, because we didn't know we were going to divide that until it came up in the deer plan. So the biologist took the data that he did have, used that, and went through years of data and made the best estimate as to kind of proportionally how the deer population lives on that unit. And it was a little bit over the old objective. We've seen good growth on the Beaver unit the last few years, and we're lowering the buck-to-deer ratio from 18 to 20 to 15 to 17. So we anticipate lower success on the restricted weapons units, but we don't know exactly how much yet. So it's kind of that adaptive management principle where you take the data you do have and make your best estimate, move forward, and then make adjustments after that. And just from discussion on that unit, I talked with the biologist there, and he's like, I feel like this is a reasonable recommendation. If folks feel like it's too aggressive and they want to be a little more conservative to start on this, I mean, that's also fine. That's why that's one that, we're voting on and bringing through the public process. And as we collect more data moving forward, I think we'll be able to refine that one and dial it in. And at this point, the biologist feels like it's a reasonable recommendation, and we're here talking about it to get input and see if folks feel differently.
Dax, would you have any heartburn meeting in the middle? I think Troy said 500 and biologist said 15 with 1,000 tags meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we're kind of picking a starting point based on where we think it ought to be, but there's still a lot of unknowns, and that we could do that and move forward and see how it goes. And I think talking with the biologist there, he said, I feel good about the recommendation, and if folks want to, go a little more conservative, we can do that too, and we'll just make adjustments as we move forward.
So the Beaver West recommendation is 900 tags.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up so I remember the
Beaver
numbers.
East is 1,900. The recommendation is 1,900. Beaver West is 900.
And it was, if you look at them combined, it is a substantial increase. It's like 1,000 permits more than it was last year. And just a few years ago, before those bad drought years, we were giving that many permits for the combined beaver unit. So it's not unprecedented in the history, the recent history of the unit, but it does represent a pretty substantial increase from last year this year.
So let's stay on the beaver unit for a bit while you're looking that up. If this doesn't distract you too much. What are the range conditions like? It's drier down there than it is up here. Are any concerns with the range?
Yeah, so the range is looking okay. I pulled up the drought map yesterday, and surprise, surprise, a lot of Utah is relatively dry. It seems like drought's kind of normal. But where we're seeing the worst drought, and you can kind of tease this out of the recommendations. We're recommending, we're reducing permits on the Southwest Desert, Pine Valley, and Zion units, kind of that extreme southwestern corner of the state. If you look at the map right now from the U.S. Drought Monitor, that little corner of the state is in extreme drought. Most of the rest of the state is mild drought. I think a couple areas are normal. You'll get snowpack and that type of thing. So we're seeing pretty good fawn survival, and a lot of, even some of the southern units like the Monroe unit looking like record fawn survival at this point, and the beavers looking positive. It's really, I think, the places where it's maybe looking the most extreme as far as drought and having impacts on deer is probably extreme southern Utah. Maybe the San Juan units, and then Zion, Southwest Desert, Pine Valley. Yeah, and it was the recommendation. So what previously last year on the beaver combined, it was 1,800 permits. And then this year, the recommendation would be 1,900 permits for the beaver west and 1,900 permits for the beaver east and 900 for the beaver west. So it is a substantial increase from where we were last year.
Your buck-to-bill ratio is changing too there too, correct? It was 18 to 20, now it's 15 to 17.
The buck-to-bill, so the beaver did get hit pretty hard during those drought years, and we definitely saw deer numbers decline. The buck-to-bill ratio had declined, but it's been trending back up, climbing back up the last few years, both in the overall deer population and also in the buck-to-bill ratio. Last year, it was at 21 bucks per 100 does, and we've seen good fawn production, and we're anticipating really good fawn survival. So we're going to recruit a lot of yearling bucks into the population this coming fall. So between, an upward trending population, upward trending buck-to-bill ratio, and a lowered buck-to-bill ratio objective, that's kind of the why behind the pretty substantial permit increase. And it's big enough, we figure we better talk about it and get some input.
Okay. Any other comments from RAC members? We'll say, I know it's not an action item. Had a few discussions with personnel from the region today. I think it's something to keep in mind as we go forward. When you look at the ratio of permits versus total population on a few of our units up north, we're really inconsistent with the rest of the state. Camas, East Canyon, Morgan, South Rich are 50 to 70% when you run a permits versus population ratio, when the rest of the state ranges 15 to 30%. Compared to that, I think that's probably something to keep in mind as we go forward. Again, it's not an action item, but I think from the division side, that's probably a valid thing to look at. We're giving significantly more permits versus the total population than we do in any other units in the state. So, okay. Just from a action item standpoint, as we kind of discussed, there's deer permits are the agenda item, but those units with less than 20% change are not part of that action item for tonight. So specifically, we have Ogden being the main one in our unit, seeing a permit change recommendation greater than 20%. So there's no other discussion on the agenda item. We'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we accept it as presented.
Motion by Ryan. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Avery. Any discussion on the motion?
I don't know how to throw it in. I'd like to see something to have some further discussion on a management plan for limited entry units, just a standard. It's a couple of these limited entry units that I've been down to experienced firsthand, not just the Vernon, but others. I think there's an opportunity there that really should, so not to request that they do that obviously this year, but to have some type of action to discuss that further. I mean, where they can have those some years and not others. I think that's something that should be put in the hands of the biologist to make that recommendation, to have those hunts.
You say management plan, you mean a management buck hunt?
Yeah, the management buck hunt. Yep.
Okay, any other discussion? Call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. All right. Dax gets a break for a second. Agenda item number 6, Rusty Robinson, once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2025. Got any points of clarification or anything you'd like to highlight?
I don't. I think I'm ready to jump right into any questions or however you want to proceed.
Okay, let's start off with questions from RAC members.
So I might be a little slow, but you had mentioned that the Wasatch Bighorn sheep population had hit a disease, and I forget which one it was. Any ideas on where that came from? What's being done?
It could be purely speculation, but as that population has grown over the last couple of years, we've started to see more and more sheep kind of occupying new areas in that Provo Canyon area, and we've had bighorn show up in Walsburg, which summers a lot of domestic sheep. We've also had bighorns show up in South Fork of Provo River, and we had a couple stray domestics got left behind in the fall there, and so I mean it's all speculation, but that's kind of where we've seen the disease too, is on that south end where those sheep would have kind of wrapped around the face for winter, and then we started seeing some issues there. So just speculation, but that's kind of what we're thinking. The first positive we picked up was a ewe this fall that was roadkill over there by that Sundance turn, and so that likely where it originated, somewhere in that vicinity, we think.
What's the impact so far?
So far, we picked up 5 or 6 mortalities between Rock Canyon and Springville, basically. And there's a lot of sheep that winter in there, and we don't know, what the mortality rate is or what it's going to be. We haven't seen it cross over onto Timpanogos or American Fork Canyon yet. It's probably a matter of time, but time will tell how virulent it is, depending on a lot of factors and the strain they get and all kinds of things. It can be anywhere from 10% mortality to 90. We just don't know. So it's kind of wait and see type of thing. And we've got quite a few callers around American Fork Canyon, and we haven't seen it at any of the callers yet. We did have one caller on that south end in Slate Canyon that turned up as a mortality. So, but yeah, it's not in the main core herd there up north yet, but we'll watch that really closely throughout the summer and see how things turn out.
The other thing it had was just on the bison. Just the total permits jumped, went from 46 to 82.
Yes.
I really want you to convince me on this. That I'm concerned with that bigfoot jump.
Are you talking about the Henry Mountains?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, the Henry Mountains.
Yeah. The reason for that, I think we completed that unit plan in 2022 or 2023. And the population objective under that plan is 325 adult bison. But it also says in that population objective that we'll employ different strategies to lower that population temporarily in times of drought. And so, as you remember, 2021 was really, really dry down there. We ended up bringing that population down to about 275 adults. And we've kept permits really low the last couple of years to try to work back up. And I think last year we went to 295. And then this year we were kind of aiming for 310. Harvest success was a little higher than we thought. We ended up with slightly over 300 adults. And with some drought concerns down there, different stakeholders on that mountain, a lot of concerns with our ag partners and things like that. We decided to just kind of push the pause button on growing that back to the 325 objective until we see how these drought conditions turn out. And so these recommendations, as you can imagine, as we lower permits and we're trying to grow that population, you end up with, your reproduction is amping up. And to keep it right there at 300-ish adults, we've got to harvest some females. So that's just the numbers game and modeling that population. So it's really just pushing the pause button. And then if we get some rain, we can try to bring permits back down and grow that population a little more.
Okay, appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's just that's one that just jumped out.
Yeah, it's a big jump for sure.
Any other questions from RAC members?
How's any change in the goats here up north? I know they've been a concern over the last few years.
I mean, the last recent count was 38 or something. And we transplanted 10, 15 from the Beaver Mountain this year. I'll let Daniel speak to it a little more, but I think it's growing, and hopefully this will give him a shot in the arm. But
Yeah, so last time we flew that unit was 2 years ago. I believe we saw 28 total goats, estimated population of about 35 or so. And then last year we transplanted 10 more goats on the mountain. I believe 8 of them were females. One was a 2-year-old male, and one was a male kid, like 6-month-old. They're all still alive and doing good. So we're just hoping that the new females will increase the reproduction in the herd and it'll take off again.
so 50-ish, Daniel, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Okay. Summarize public comments on this.
Yep. So we had 6 responses. This agenda item, 50% of those strongly agreed, 33% somewhat agreed, and 17% were neutral. So that's an average of 4.3. And there was one comment that was specific to just wanting to see smaller incremental increases in tags, specific with bison, and not these big swings of large increases and large decreases.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move to public comment. We have one comment card on this agenda item. That's Troy Justinson.
Troy Justinson, Sports and Fishing Life. We support the division's recommendations as presented. One thing we like to bring up is I believe that the sheep committee reconvenes this next year. And our committee would like to ask the division to look at different ways to use hunters when we got to depopulate areas, or if we have a concern with a disease outbreak, and trying to mitigate those things and allowing hunters to take those sheep before they get too far gone. So that's the only thing we'd like. So thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Okay, open it up for RAC discussion. Making this easy. All right, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second it.
Motion by Ross, seconded by Steve to approve the once in a lifetime permit recommendations for 2025 as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, agenda item number 7, back to Dax for the elk permit recommendations for 2025. Anything you want to clarify or start off with for us on the elk?
Maybe just a reminder, we revised our statewide elk plan a couple years ago and changed some of our age objectives for our limited entry elk units. And we've been working towards those and made some permit increases over the last few years. And you see some more recommended increases on a good chunk of the limited entry units. And yeah, happy to dive in and have any discussion. I guess just one of the things for clarification, in the statewide elk plan, we set the permit numbers for the general season elk hunts for the general season spike hunt and the general season early rifle any bull hunt, as well as the archery hunt and the youth hunt. So the only general season elk hunts that we're proposing to get a vote on tonight would be that new Uinta Basin private lands bull hunt, and then the youth early youth draw any bull hunter's choice permit. The one where if the youth draw the permit, they can go hunt kind of during the rut in September. And that's been at 750 permits, I think, for a couple of years now, and we're recommending keeping it the same. So, and happy to dive in and answer any other questions or help facilitate any other discussion.
What's the mid-plan? Well, I don't know if it's a mid-plan review on the elk plan. Is that next year?
Yes.
Well, we should change the name of that permit and when we do that.
I think Lindy from licensing is watching this. She'll probably send me a text message, but she did a great job, and she's like, we need to make sure the name is very specific as to what it actually is. There has been some confusion a few times with folks that their youth drew that and then thought they could go hunt any bull anywhere in the state and went and hunted on a limited entry unit. So there's a reason the name is that long and descriptive, and it's kind of ridiculously long. Lindy just texted me. I'm not going to read it right now. I might have said something wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions from RAC members? Our success rate on that unnamed youth hunt stayed about the same. Have we seen any? We increased the permits on that 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's so the general season any bull hunt success rate is usually low teens type success, 11, 12, 13%, something like that is typically what we see. The general elk hunts are hard. It's hard elk hunting is hard, period. And those general hunts are particularly hard. The youth success rate is usually 2 to 2.5 times as high as we see on the general season. I was looking at it just the other day. If I remember certainly correctly, it's been around in that 30% range for that youth, that early youth hunt. So it's, a little more than twice as high. They do kind of get first crack, and definitely, if you have the right weather conditions and bulls are bugling a little bit, it can be easier to find them. And you got fewer other people out there. We have a little bit of overlap with the end of the archery season, but those youth get, they're using a rifle typically and stuff. So yeah, it is higher. It's not as high as what we see on our limited entry units, but it is higher.
We haven't seen a shift in success rate with the increased permits. We went from 500 to 750.
Yeah, not a huge increase. I think it might have dropped a few percentage points, like 3% or something. But it's been in that 30 to 35% range for quite a while, I think. So
okay.
Even with those extra permits, I'd have to look to tell you if 100%, but it's ballpark. It's maybe even within margin of error.
Okay.
Maybe time, maybe not the time. It's the elk tax. So the HB 202. There were some changes through the Senate side and a little bit of confusion. Did it ultimately get determined that those tags still are, yes, coming from the public pool? or did that get changed a little bit?
So it's a little bit kind of how you want to wrap your head around it. So if we're managing to an age objective, every permit counts, because if more people are harvesting more bulls, the average age is going to go down. So, but the way it's done is we set what we're going to set for the public draw, and then they add an additional 5% and kind of just pull those permits out of the air and add them. So they don't necessarily come out of what we're recommending for the public draw, but it's 5% on top of that. But it does factor in over time, as if we're harvesting additional bulls, you know, over time, maybe we'll see that age go down. And so we'll have to make adjustments to the public permit number. So it's not directly coming out of the public permit numbers, but it is part of the process, and it at least indirectly factors in. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's kind of like taking money out of one pocket and putting it in a different pocket type of thing is what it feels like a little bit. But ultimately, all the bull permits count, especially for managing to an age objective.
With the changes, I mean, and with what's out there, because before I was including smaller acreage. And so with the change to just the increase, what's the estimated number of tags do they think that you're going to see from that?
I'm looking behind me to see if anyone knows.
Sorry, I remember I was down at the house when they were talking about it, and their estimates at that point was like 100 plus tags. And I'm curious if it's still that or if that's lower.
Yeah, but I'll get back to you on that one, Ross. It's some. It's probably significant, but it's also, yeah. You guys tell me when you know the answer. I keep looking at Kobe.
Sorry, Kobe.
Kobe's always good to get up and give a comment of some kind, whether he knows the answer or not.
Yeah, I can make something up. So there are two parts to this, right? There's the additional 5%, which we actually did in our landowner rule. It's a little bit different than when we did it, because they're given as vouchers, correct, Chad? The 5%. Okay, so that's the 5%. The other part of this is any contiguous piece of land that is between, and Chad will present on this later, but between 4,000 acres and 8,999 acres qualifies for up to 2 permits a year. All to hunt on that private property. So yeah, we did an analysis. We have a number, but okay, so it has to be a contiguous block of land under the same ownership. And so the analysis was, it's crude and it's hard to get at exactly what that looks like, right? So the answer is easy. It's up to 5% additional permits above what we recommend for limited entry elk permits on limited entry elk units. That one's easy. The other one, we'll have to see how many applications we get, vet those applications, and we'll get you back a number. But I think even our biggest number was like 200, Chad, or it was less than 200. Do you remember the number? All right.
It's the earliest we've ever had Chad up in a meeting. This is great.
You caught me off guard a little bit. Yeah, so really what we're looking at is a total of 160 max permits on that. Only from what we've seen, the max for the 4,000 plus acreage would be 38 potential landowners. And this was a really hard exercise because you're taking a whole unit and we're just grabbing some raw data. We can dive in super deep. So some of these are landowners that have the total 4,000 or more acreage, but it's not confirmed that it's contiguous. So that number would probably go down. Even out of this 160, that's probably going to go down. Like if I had to guess, it'd probably be less than 100, but that'd be a guess.
Thanks. Sorry.
And that's significant when we only give, 1,500, 1,700 limited entry elk permits. So if 100 more don't go through the public draw, it's significant.
Okay. Any other questions from RAC members?
We give over 3,000 limited entry elk permits. Sorry, I correct myself there. Yeah, I was thinking deer.
So on asking this question, I wish we'd have the display up because I didn't make my notes as good as I should have. But I had a concern on the boulder unit. There was a significant drop in age in the last year. But we're keeping the permit numbers the same on that. And I can't remember that's and you'll have to tell me what the drop was, because it was a significant drop, and had some concern leaving the permit numbers and size.
Yeah, so the Boulder in 2022, average age was 8.4, 2023 average age was 8.4, and then in 2024, so last year, with a pretty substantial permit increase, it dropped to 7.4, it dropped a full year. The 3-year average is 8.1, and even at 7.4 last year, I think the thing to keep in mind is the objective for that unit is 6.5 to 7. And so that was why we're like, it did drop a year, but the objective, it's still above the objective, even at the lowest that it was last year. And so that was why on that one, we recommended, let's let it ride one more year and see what happens. If it drops again, we'll probably be right at the bottom end of the objective, and then maybe we've got to make an adjustment. But that's the thought process behind that recommendation. But yeah, it did drop a full year. So.
And I'll admit, this is just my brother's. I'd rather not drop to the bottom of the objective. I'd rather stay on the high end rather than. So that one did concern me. Other than that, I liked it. So.
Jackson, your presentation, you mentioned Pilot Mountain and our cooperation with Nevada. Do they have an age class objective on their side?
Oh, we'll get Daniel, the biologist that oversees that, to come up and talk a little to the details on that.
So Nevada does have a pseudo age objective. They don't use teeth for their aging. They use main beam length as a proxy. The data they used for that indicated that if a bull had a main beam length of 50 inches or greater, it was most likely 6 or 8 years old. I can't remember what one. So they managed for a percentage of the harvest with a main beam greater than 50 inches. I think that percentage, it's like 25 or 30%. I don't know off the top of my head. So we've kind of been in a funny situation the last few years where, based on tooth data from Utah, and then the last 2 years, also tooth data from Nevada, we got teeth from their harvest as well, that we've been above our age objective from teeth, but we've been very far below Nevada's objective of main beam length. So every year it's kind of like, well, we're conflicting, so we'll keep it the same. They also go off a 3-year average. So this year we had a interesting thing happen out there where our success rate dropped relatively low to what it was. Usually we have near 100% success on rifle, and 50-ish% on archery. This year we had 0% on archery, and I think out of like 11 or so rifle tags, 6 or 7 harvested, so relatively low. But on the Nevada side, about 50% of the bulls had main beam lengths larger than 50 inches. So success went down, but quality went up. So we decided to let it ride again to figure out what happened with that. So yeah, it's just conflicting management. Yeah, we want to get to the same thing, but we have 2 different ways to do it, and it doesn't always work out like we want it. So any other questions?
Good, thank you.
Jamie, did I see you asking about the main beam? Okay, got it. It's that main point that the other points come off of. Yeah, got it.
What's our return rate on teeth? On
80
average,
to 90%.
It's high.
It's pretty high.
Yeah.
Okay. And we did mandatory harvest reporting this last year, was the first year of mandatory harvest reporting for like general season deer. We've done it for limited entry and once in a lifetime for years, but it was the first year for general season bucks and bulls, and we had about 90% harvest reporting. So that's about as good as you can ask for.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Okay. Any other questions? Questions from the public? All right. Larry, you want to summarize public comments on this one?
Yep. So for the elk recommendations, we had 5 responses, 20% strongly agreed, 20% somewhat agreed, and 20% were neutral, and 40% strongly disagreed. So that's a 2.8 average. And we had 1 comment that was raised concerns about increasing tags on the fish lake. They wanted to see, again, just a slow increase and not just wild swings and such a substantial increase.
Thank you. Okay, we got two public comment cards for this agenda item. Start with Troy Justinson, followed by Adam Dennison.
Roy Justinson, sports official on life. We support the division's recommendations as presented with one exception, and that is our San Juan chapter would like to keep the bull permits on the San Juan the same as last year. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Adam?
My name is Adam Dennison. I'm also with Utah's chapter of backcountry hunters and anglers, and we do support generally the modest increase in elk tags for this coming season, and are always eager to see increased opportunity for the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the public comment cards. Open it up for RAC discussion.
Well, I'll ask, since it came up, what was the Senator Phil's numbers last year?
In the San Juan.
San Juan. So San Juan is a 6.5 to 7 age objective unit. The last 3 years it's been 8.3, 7.6, 7.9. 3-year average is 7.9. Again, on a 6.5 to 7, it was at 105 permits. We're recommending adding 10 permits, so going to 115.
Any other RAC discussion? Okay. I think overall it's interesting to see some of the swings we're seeing with the age classes on some of these units with the implementation of the mid-rifle hunts and other parts of this coming into play. Some of these units are seeing some pretty big swings depending on the year. Some drop by a year, some gain a year. But we're not necessarily seeing them fall off very quick. And I think that's probably more attributed to the slower increase in permits that we've seen the past couple of years. So, okay. Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the Elk Permit Recommendations as proposed.
I'll second that.
Motion by Ross, seconded by Ryan. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, agenda item number 8. Pronghorn permit recommendations for 2025. Dax?
Okay, yeah. Buck pronghorn, we managed for average age of harvested buck, 2 to 3 years old. That's a little younger than some of our other big game species. We see that pronghorn kind of realized their horn growth potential at a younger age. So we managed for a little bit younger bucks in the harvest. Allows us to give a little more opportunity. We've increased permits quite a bit since we implemented that in a plan change back in 2017. And if this year's recommendation went through as presented, it would represent basically a doubling of permits since 2017. But we haven't seen the success rates drop. Hunter satisfaction still remains pretty high. So, and our recommendations are based on that average age of harvested bucks. Probably the one exception or the biggest change is probably the Parker Mountain unit, where that is a really productive unit. And it seems to be a little bit sensitive to hunting pressure as well. And we can change the distribution of animals on the landscape. And, but we're above our population objective. So we've got to harvest more pronghorn. And we're trying to find ways to do that don't push all the pronghorn off the unit or cause us to have, some big complicating factor that way. But has a really high buck to doe ratio on the Parker. And that's our biggest increase. Happy to jump into any other pronghorn recs or questions.
Okay, any questions from RAC members? Go ahead, Randy.
You know I'm going to. I'm so sorry. But and it's actually Parker. So I know you haven't been in the lead on the big game for a while, but that used to be a really big unit, like as far as numbers. Why is the objective set at 15? So I not a biologist, but sure seems like that area can carry a whole lot more than that. I see more deer down there than I see, and there's not a lot of deer down.
Yeah, so when we set an objective, in a unit plan, we set an objective, and the objectives a lot of times end up being kind of a compromise that takes into consideration biological and social and economic factors, other things besides just how much forage do we have and what could we grow here. We could probably hold a lot more pronghorn on Parker Mountain. And there's concerns about, which animals are eating what, and the permittees are concerned that the pronghorn might be eating the forage that they'd rather feed to their domestic sheep where they have federal grazing permits. And so that objective of 1,500 is kind of based on a compromise of, okay, how much does wildlife get, how much do other mouths get to take off this landscape. We're looking at that one, and that's one where I think speaking with the biologist down there, Morgan, she is interested in getting a committee put together and maybe looking at changing that objective, potentially raising it. We feel like there's probably some research that needs to be done and some things we maybe need to look at, some questions we need to answer before we really can dive into that process. And so, we've had a couple meetings with potential research partners in academia to maybe look at some stuff on the Parker. But the other thing, if we end up with if we raise the objective to 2,000 pronghorn, and they stay this productive, we're still going to have to get substantial harvest annually just to keep up with production and manage it at 2,000. So it might seem like a lot of permits at 1,500, but if you have 2,000, you might have to issue even more permits to keep up with the production of a larger population. So raising the objective isn't always the answer. It might, in some ways, it can make it even trickier. But the recommendations, and we'll talk about it more when we get into doe pronghorn permit recommendations. We really recommended kind of splitting the hunt up over multiple seasons and different areas even. And with the buck permits too, we're recommending altering the weapon splits a little bit just to spread that hunting pressure out a little bit more over time. So, but yeah, I'll be totally honest, candid about it. Parker's kind of a challenge. It's a little bit of a challenge to manage. It's a really productive unit, and it presents some tricky parts to figuring out how to manage it too.
Well, I would hope that does get looked at, because I know there's conflict, but there's a lot of conflict now. I think that area can carry more. The other question that came up in an email, I wish I'd thought of it myself. If the numbers are correct on the bow tax, from 14 to 60, that sound correct?
For Parker?
Yeah.
Yeah. So overall permits from the unit for Parker, we're recommending going from 75 to 200. So it's a big increase, and with the change in the splits. So typically the splits are 20% archery, 20% muzzleloader, 60% rifle. And I think we recommended going 30% archery, 30% muzzleloader, 40% rifle. And so in addition to more total permits, we're also proportionally putting more in the archery and muzzleloader seasons just to spread out hunting pressure.
And the concern that the hunter had about that, though, and after he brought it, like I said, I wish I'd thought about this, but if you're bow hunting antelope, you're doing it over. So can we have 60 bow hunters down there over the limited water pools that we have?
Are we worried about fist fights at the ground blinds by the ponds?
Yeah, I mean, how many blinds do you really want set up over the maybe 20 water holes?
Yeah, no, I think it's something to think about. Talking with the biologist down there, she did say that those pronghorn, and maybe it's because of really intense hunting pressure in the past, do spend more time in probably non-traditional pronghorn habitat. They spend more time like in aspens and closer to trees. Yeah, it could be a concern. If we do really have pronghorn spending more time in the trees and the aspen, maybe there's more spot and stock opportunities than you might see in some other types of pronghorn country. And it's probably likely that you could end up with folks fighting over spots on water holes too. So that's kind of public land hunting for you.
Thank you.
I got a little bit of a heartburn, Dax, over the split, the 30-30-40. It's like most of your guys, I assume, are fine for rifle. And, you know, I hate to see that split grow. It's not fair to the guys with all the points with the rifle trying to draw it, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, I hear you, Steve. And I think one of the things at this point in the game, it's too late, but I think one of the things that we'll probably look at in years coming forward is maybe having a second rifle hunt on that unit. You know, we have right now the rifle hunt it's 9 days, it's 2 weekends, it's kind of mid-September. It coincides with, you know, the elk rut, the pronghorn rut, they're about the same time. And I think we probably need to have a second rifle hunt on that, like early October or something.
That'd be awesome.
But too late to do it right now.
Okay. Any other questions from RAC members? Questions from the public?
And if you guys want to vote on the splits, I think you have that prerogative to do that.
Okay. Let's, Blair, summarize public comments on this one.
Okay, we had 4 responses to this agenda item. 50% of those strongly agreed, 25% somewhat agreed, and 25% strongly disagreed, but still at a weighted average of 3.8. And there was one comment, and it pertained to archery hunting on the Parker, very similar to what conversation all of you just had. Just concerned about crowding issues with archery hunters over water.
Okay, thank you. All right. One public comment card on this one, Troy Justinson.
Well, Justin, Sportsman Fish Wildlife, Cody says you can use that cutout on the hole and sit them in it instead of sitting in the water hole. Is that right, Cody? SFW supports the division's recommendations on the pronghorn. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Okay, let's open it up for RAC discussion.
Kind of having a little bit of flashback here from the cash antelope herd when we started targeting it pretty heavy, and now it's down to nothing. I worry that if we get aggressive, it'll be Willard goats or cash moose or cash antelope here. I get managing it to the plan and everything, guys, but man, I've seen 3 different herds in my home area go to nothing from being aggressive.
So you already heard my concerns, so I won't rehash that. I do hope that objective goes up. It would just give us more hunting opportunity later. But with Steve's comment, I was just wondering, it made me think of a question. Have we had any concerns, or have we seen any signs of some of Wyoming's problems creeping across our deer herd up in Cache and Rich?
Are you talking disease or?
Yeah, disease.
So we haven't seen it in Utah. So thankfully, but that harsh winter, that winter 22-23, when we saw pretty substantial pronghorn die-offs in, western and southern Wyoming, we did see that on that cache herd. So, but we haven't seen the mycoplasma.
Okay, and the disease is what I was worried about.
Any other discussion? Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. Accept it as presented, except for on the Parker. If we could do maybe 2 rifle hunts and keep the split at 60-20-20 DAX and come up with another rifle season.
I can't do that now because the draw's already open and everything. And so that's why if we're going to add an additional rifle season, we probably can't do it until next year.
Copy. But keep that motion for next year.
There you go.
I'll just pull my motion. How about that?
Okay.
Somebody else take a stab at it
All
since
right.
that's not on the table.
Motion withdrawn.
I'll make a motion that we do approve the pronghorn permit recommendations as presented by the division.
Okay. Motion to accept.
I'll second it.
Motion by Robert, seconded by Steve to approve the pronghorn permit recommendations for 2025 as presented. Any discussion on the motion?
Is there anything we need to do special to make sure the conversation comes up? Like add that as an action item on the proposal to look at that split at a future date? Because obviously these recommendations come out after the draw's already started. So how do we get that in place?
We'd want to look at it next fall, in the fall RAC when we do season dates. And we just did 3 years worth of season dates, but we kept the door open for if we needed to make an emergency change, and this would probably be appropriate for that type of a situation. So I just, hold our feet to the fire come November RACs to make sure we're on this one, but we will be.
Would asking Robert to amend the motion to include that be looked at in November be appropriate?
I think if we wanted to add something there and this one, that you could possibly make a second motion, just asking the board to look at an action item for it, may be the cleanest way.
Well, could I suggest when you're at the board meeting, just to make certain that that's it, because the board will always ask the RAC presidents what's going on, thoughts, as long as that's addressed, would that be good news? And then that way that also help us make certain to address it in November.
Yeah, I think that, and then making sure we make a check mark to add that for the November conversation.
Yep. Okay. Call for a vote on this motion. Brian?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, agenda item number 9, Antlerless permit recommendations for 2025. Dax.
So, with the Bucks and Bulls, we set the season dates in November so that we've got all that established and for when the drop period's open, right now. With Antlerless, we're setting both the season, the hunts that we're going to have and the season dates and the permit numbers all at once right now. So we have more flexibility what we do with Antlerless because that draw doesn't open for a while still here. But our Antlerless recommendations with elk, we do recommend quite a few Antlerless elk permits just because we're trying to manage the populations to the population objectives based in our unit plans. With both pronghorn and deer, our statewide population estimates are somewhat below where our statewide population objectives are. So we don't recommend a lot of doe deer or doe pronghorn permits. With pronghorn, the bulk of those are going to be Parker Mountain and then a handful in a few other areas of the state where we've got conflicts on private ag lands, pronghorn that are in alfalfa fields, irrigated alfalfa fields, that type of thing. And with doe deer, it's pretty similar situation. We don't recommend very many doe deer permits. The doe deer permits that we do have are pretty surgical, pretty strategic, trying to focus on areas where we've got human health and safety issues or concerns, where we've got deer coming into towns, or we've got, again, conflicts with, cultivated agricultural lands. So we don't have any doe deer hunts that are designed to lower overall deer numbers on a unit. They're all pretty surgical to the specific situations, and happy to go through any of those or help out with any discussion there.
Okay. So start with questions from RAC members. Casey, you got a question?
Yeah. Feedback.
Oh, go ahead.
Kind of cutting out there. Sorry. Can't
No,
quite.
no. There's a big echo on my end.
No.
No, you're good.
Okay, I'll just pretend not to hear it and we'll punch through this. Hey, Dax, so the legislature passed a bill a couple of years ago that basically says if new development moves into suburbia, it's the onus of suburbia and the people that move there just to deal with wildlife conflicts. I'm wondering if it's still moving that direction philosophically, and if any of these recommendations you counter to that.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I don't think any of these recommendations run counter to that, especially with the the hunts that we have are that are designed to deal with deer in town. They're all hunts that we've had before. It's not new stuff. And that's a good reminder to make sure all the biologists kind of keep that in mind when we do look at antlerless hunts and those types of things moving forward. So, and I appreciate the efforts from the legislature to help our public remember that wildlife is part of Utah too, and responsible landscaping and being willing to put up with a few deer in your yard if you build a house in the foothills, that type of thing. So thanks for the reminder on that one, Casey. We'll make sure that that's something we're always keeping in mind. And I don't think any of these recommendations run contrary to that.
Thanks.
This may be more a question for the region. Morgan South Ridge, since we haven't picked on this one yet tonight, we might as well start now. Looks like a reduction in 40 total permits. What's our reasoning behind that?
Jayla, do you want to come up? We'll get Jayla to come up and if you
She likes to
if
talk
you ask
in
a really
meetings,
hard
so.
question, I have someone from the region come answer it.
Yeah.
Everybody's skipping their names and titles today too. So Jayla Walden, Morgan Southridge District Bio. So I'm reducing the permits because the bulk of those hunters, like 95% of them or more, hunt on the Hennifer Echo WMA. We've actually knocked back that population. So there's 3 subpopulations on Morgan Southridge, and we've knocked back that subpopulation pretty significantly. And so we need to redistribute the hunting pressure onto more of the private. Otherwise, we're just going to wipe out one group of elk or they're just going to move off of there entirely. And so I'm just trying to redistribute hunting pressure.
Years past, haven't we had, let me jog my memory, permits specific to the WMA?
We have, now we do have some permits specific to like the South Ridge portion of the unit, just a handful of them, just kind of address landowner issues for the most part. But now we just make it unit wide otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
I guess before you take off, is it worth exploring going back to that if we have, I mean, if our herds are still exceeding the numbers, but we're seeing that specific issue on like one WMA versus other areas, is it worth considering going back to doing specific tag recommendations per each WMA versus making it, unit wide?
So we only have that WMA and then we have some Forest Service land on that unit. And so trying to break it up further isn't going to help us harvest more elk on the unit. Making it more broad scale is going to give us the best chance at killing more elk possible.
Remind us, most recent count versus the objective for Morgan South Ridge?
Let me pull it up because my brain's a little busy right now.
I guess while you're doing that, I assume a lot of that area, we're hoping to see some help from the CWMUs in reducing those numbers. I know.
So
That's why the biologist is here.
we're sitting at 5,700 elk and the population objective is 4,200.
Okay.
So
That's come down a little bit over the past 2 years, right?
yeah, so after that really hard winter in 2022, 2023, we saw a reduction in about 1,000 elk, and it was probably a combination of elk moving off of the unit and also some mortality. We probably had about a 10% mortality on elk.
Okay. Did you fly the unit this year?
We didn't fly it this year. We flew it last year, and then we're slated to fly it next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I think I missed one other question, but I'm not positive.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. Any other questions from RAC members?
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the Parkers again. That number from 25 to 250 is just way too high. I mean, they're not great examples because there's so much private property, but we've got a number of units with elk that are only 200 over objective, and we're not 10 times the amount of permits that are going in. I really struggle with this.
On the Parker pronghorn.
On the Parker.
Yeah. Yeah. So the objective is 1,500. Our current population estimate based on a flight this spring, we estimate we've got 1,700, about 1,750 on the unit. So we're a couple 250 over. And then when we look at fawn recruitment of what's going to be born this year, we need to probably harvest almost 200 bucks and almost 200 does just to maintain at the current population level that's above objective. So it is a big increase, and yeah.
But and this is again where I should have brought my iPad so I could have the numbers in front of me. But there were a number of units that were 200 in other species that were not hitting anywhere near
And
this aggressive. I really dislike how aggressive this is.
And I think, just to be totally fair, it's a little bit apples and oranges comparing pronghorn and elk. Just because we do have a lot of additional tools for elk, especially on those units that are over objective. We have a lot of units that have the private lands only antlerless elk permits, or even a bunch of units that have the control permits for elk. And we do that to try to create tools specifically for conflicts that happen on private lands. And this Parker situation, it's pretty much public lands. It's pretty much all BLM and SITLA. And so it's a little different situation. And I hear you, it's a big increase. It's aggressive. And the division, we're directed to make recommendations to manage towards the population objective. And that's what we're trying to do here. And we have a public process for people to weigh in on how we're doing that, and yeah, make motions or suggestions or whatever. So
thanks.
On that, Parker, I don't recall seeing like dates for when those are. I mean, with that big of an increase, like how are you looking to distribute those, I guess, so we don't have that many more hunters on the landscape?
Yeah, I've got it pulled up right here. We've got 1, 2, 3 different hunts using the greater Parker Mountain boundary, an archery hunt, a muzzleloader hunt, and any legal weapon hunt, with 30 permits on the archery hunt that starts the very end of August, so a little bit after the buck hunting, and then runs till September 12th. We've got 30 permits recommended for that. They're in the tables. And then that muzzleloader season is later. It runs like during the spike muzzleloader season dates, end of October, early November. We're recommending 35 doe pronghorn permits for that. And then any legal weapon hunt in December. We're recommending 40 permits for that. And then we've got a couple Parker Highlands hunts, and any legal weapon hunt for does in October, and another one in November with 35 and 40 permits each on those. And then a couple Parker Mountain Plains hunts, which is kind of the opposite boundary of the Highlands, and which is a new boundary created this year by the biologist on there. And we have a couple rifle hunts there, one in October, one in November. So we're trying to spread it out. You know, we got 7 different hunts from August through December, and spread out over 3 different boundaries. So the biologist is trying to learn from past experience, where when we had too many hunters at once in the same area, we felt like it caused those pronghorn to do some unpredictable things and made it tricky. So we're trying to address that. And again, we're just trying to make a recommendation to manage the objective. And this is a hard one. This is one when we don't want to repeat the past, where the pronghorn just all leave and become unavailable, and you end up with a bunch of frustrated folks. But we're also legally mandated to manage to the objective. So
talk to us about what's the options for transplants off of there instead of antlerless.
So, and this is wild. You know, I told you we counted the spring and we're above objective. We did transplant 300 pronghorn off Parker last December. And so in the new count that puts us above objective is after the 300 we took off. So we did transplant a bunch and moved them to other units. Parker's amazing. This is a great problem. I wish I had this problem with deer. I wish we're like, we have so many deer, we don't know what to do with them. So I'm not too sad about, it's a problem, but it's a happy problem. So, but we put collars on, I think 260 something of the does that we transplanted. And we did see really high mortality, like especially the first few weeks after we moved those. And we're going to monitor it for a full year and see what it did. But we saw high enough mortality. It was kind of concerning to us. It was a really dry year. It was maybe a little warmer than normal. But that mortality was kind of concerning to us. And so when I talked with the region, they said, let's give it a full year to look at the survival and analyze the data and make a decision based on what we saw. Maybe we can learn some things and do the transplants a little differently moving forward. But one of the things, it's actually easier right now as a resident of Utah, it's easier to draw a buck pronghorn permit than it is to draw a doe pronghorn permit. There's a lot of people putting in, they said, maybe this year, let's give the opportunity to hunters instead of transplanting a bunch of animals. If a high percentage of those are going to die anyways, maybe we're better off letting hunters harvest a few more while we kind of take a year to look at this data set over this year and see, go into it with eyes wide open to decide if we're going to do large scale transplants. And if we do transplants, and I think that probably is a tool we'll continue to use on Parker, but we might change our protocols a little bit and not push animals as far, or maybe not push them. We push them into like a winged funnel trap, essentially, with a helicopter, and kind of like the old school style. But we may shorten the distance that we're willing to chase them in the helicopter, or we may, set some thresholds as far as like temperature or snow, because we don't want to push animals to the point where they just get let out of a trailer somewhere else and die within the next week or two. So we want to use the resource responsibly. And so at this point right now for this year, we're leaning more towards hunter opportunity as we kind of take a little pause to see what we can learn from the transplant and decide how we move forward.
Thank you.
I'm not super familiar with that area, just a little bit there on the highway that goes to Loa, but is there much ag problem? Goats getting into ag?
Just a little bit. Yeah. And the first batch of pronghorn that we took off, that we transplanted, we took them up to the cache. They came out of kind of those ag field areas, and they didn't run as far to the trap, and we saw a lot lower mortality in those ones. And maybe it was a function of better nutrition because they're eating fertilized, irrigated alfalfa, and also probably they didn't have to run as far and didn't get as stressed from the capture. But it's not a major issue there. More of the conflict is kind of range land competition for feed.
Since antelope don't eat the same thing as cattle. Sorry, I had to throw that out there.
Okay. Any other questions from RAC members? Questions from the public? Summarize public comments for us on this one, Blair.
Yep. So for Antlerless recommendations, we had 5 responses. 20% of those strongly agreed, 20% somewhat agreed, 20% were neutral, and 40 strongly disagreed. So that was an average of 2.8. And there were 4 comments on these. They ranged kind of on multiple issues. There were several comments of people who wanted to see archery specific tags for cow moose. There was a comment about disagreeing with the Elk Permit Recommendation on the cache. They didn't want to see a decrease. And then a concern with increasing the doe pronghorn permits, specifically the issue we had up in Rich County a couple years ago, where we were pretty aggressive and then lost a lot during the winter. So just some concerns that increasing too much could lead to issues like that.
Okay, thank you. Have one public comment card for this agenda item. Adam Dennison.
Again, Adam Dennison, Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So we do support the decrease in the antlerless deer permit statewide. We understand that doe mortality is the primary driver of the herd increases and decreases. So with deer population still below objective, we do support minimizing those doe permits and only targeting areas where the conflict occurs. We do support the increase in antlerless elk and doe pronghorn permits just due to the availability of what's available or for the public out there, and for the increased opportunity it's going to provide hunters across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, open it up for RAC discussion. All right. Entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to accept as presented, other than reducing the antelope doe tag permits to 125.
On Parker? Okay. Okay, even better. Which Parker? There's 3 listed.
Cutting them all in half.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the motion is to accept the antlerless permit recommendations with the exception of the Parker Mountain doe pronghorn hunts to be half of the recommendation. Okay. Got that? All right. I have a motion. We have a second.
I can second it.
Okay. Motion by Randy, seconded by Ryan. Any discussion on the motion? All right.
A question for Dax during Snowmageddon. How did that Parker Mountain Longhorn, how did they do that year?
So they did well. I think really where that bad snow year, that 2022, 2023 Snowmageddon, where that really impacted was kind of the Wasatch back and then kind of the extreme, northeastern corner of Utah, like the Cache unit. The closer you were to Wyoming, the harder it was on you. So, but Parker Mountain is kind of unique. It's high elevation, kind of that high desert stuff like you see in Wyoming, but it doesn't tend to get the type of winter kill you see in Wyoming. So it is pretty unique in that regard. But yeah, I actually think that has helped spur some of this big growth that's put us in the situation where we are.
What about same mortality with the bad drought years leading up to it? I mean, did they still do well and grow during those years as well?
So I think the drought does have a little bit more of an impact maybe on Parker Mountain, but still it's relatively high elevation, so it doesn't seem to affect it as much as some of as much as drought might affect, kind of our middle and lower elevation deer populations. Parker is kind of unique in that regard, but we did see a little dip in production during those worst drought years on Parker. But when you have a good year or wet year, those Parker pronghorns seem to be able to just explode. It's like they're coming out of the ground, which is a good problem. I wish we had it with deer.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion?
I'm just going to say that the biologists are doing the work and there's the recommendations and the numbers. And I feel like, we sit here one moment and say, hey, trust the biologist. And then in the next we don't. And I think, again, that hurts growing. Again, it's not a perfect science, but I mean, they pulled another 300, as they said, and that unit still is over. I just like the opportunity for the public hunter. I can understand the concern of increasing the tags that much, but it sounds like there's more than enough there to support it.
I'm with Ross with the winter kill being non-existent. I don't think it's as big as a problem, and I hate to tell a biologist what to do except for Sam. So that's it.
You're just jealous of Sam's hair.
And maybe Drax can address this. One of my concerns is this unit used to be stellar. I mean, it was amazing. And then it got overhunted, it got overtrapped. And then the few animals that were left there were pushed out to the surrounding non-antelope areas. I see us going down that road again because the area is so magical. You just said the population is going to expand so quickly, but we've also proven we're very capable of destroying that population.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think, we are cognizant of that and a little, that's why we recommended maybe doing some things differently than happened last go around. And to be totally fair, when we did have some of those problems that happened on Parker, we had, folks from the ag community that were really concerned that came and successfully lobbied the board that they doubled the doe pronghorn permits that we had recommended. And so I don't know if you can put all the blame on division recommendations, and sometimes we get stuff wrong. We don't always get it right. We do our best. We try to have good data. We try to make good recommendations, and sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to. And Parker's been one where we've had that situation. And, yeah, we don't want to have that again. It's a tough one.
Thank you.
With all respect to Randy, may I withdraw my second? Is that allowed at this point?
I don't know. No, it's not.
All right, I'll wait to vote.
Okay. All right. Okay, on that note, I'll call for a vote. Brian?
No.
Jamie?
It's so hard, you guys, because I'm gonna, and so are you gonna make another vote? Are you gonna like?
If this one doesn't pass, then we'd have another recommendation to, I mean, if I just call it, my recommendation would be is presented. So if this doesn't pass, then we would have a recommendation, or if somebody made something different.
Can we still ask questions from the division?
We've started the vote now. I think we'll need to finish that part first.
So hard. I'm gonna abstain.
All right. Avery?
I was gonna ask a question when we started voting. Yes.
Robert?
With respect, no.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
No.
Emily?
The proposed.
So the motion is to accept as presented, but cut the number of permits on the Parker Mountains in half from the division's recommendation. And Ross?
No.
Motion fails 5-3 with one abstention. Okay. Entertain another motion.
I'll make, oh, I was gonna say, yeah, if you have your questions.
So previously, when you did have high populations on the Parker and you upped the doe permits, and then we saw some declines following that, what was the population and what were the doe permits issued those years, or approximately?
Similar to what we're proposing this year. The doe permits were more, though. I think we had recommended 200 and the board doubled them to 400. So, and we're recommending 250 this year. So it was more doe permits than what we're recommending now.
It was,
and it
like
was
400 versus 200, basically.
Yeah,
400
and
versus
a
250.
couple of years in a row too. I can dig and find the exact data, but probably, probably not in time to make a vote right now.
I was just curious, kind of the scale of it.
Okay. Entertain another motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the permit recommendations as proposed.
Okay, motion by Ross, sorry.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, seconded by Robert to accept as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes. Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
And Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
I just wanted to tell you all thanks. Some of these are really hard decisions sometimes, and appreciate your thoughtfulness and consideration. Yeah, we put you in a tough spot sometimes. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Dax. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 10. The earliest he's ever been at a meeting. All right, Chad. The 2025 CWMU Antlerless Permit Recommendations.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to clarify. I think it's pretty straightforward, and it sounds like I'm going to have at least one question coming. So.
Let's start with questions from the RAC.
I'm just curious if we saw some more help and or what the herd looked like after this last year with the cow tax.
Yeah, so if you see one of the change applications, probably the biggest one is Deseret. It's another 115 cow tags. With the new rule that was passed, there essentially all of them can get 2 cow tags. So I mean, that's a pretty significant increase. Looking at that additional cow tag that was able to, the ones that participated in that, it actually boosted the amount of cows significantly on a lot of those units. So we're hopeful though that we're going in the right direction there.
Casey, you got a question?
I do, yeah. Maybe along to even looking at doing shorter hunt dates, a couple of days here for hunters in order to move more people through there, just to try and bring those calibers back so we don't end up in a situation with sharpshooters and not using the public like we did last year. Are you, in the discussions with Deseret, have they followed up with some of those commitments they made to the legislature during the session?
Yeah. We're on track for, I'm going off memory now, but I think 3 different hunt season structures. And so, yeah, it'll spread it out. We're going to meet with them even a little bit more this summer come June and really hammer things out. I think potentially we're looking at a split change that would give them more private vouchers going forward. We're going to at least entertain that with them.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from RAC members? Any questions from the public? Okay, you summarize public comments on this.
All right, so for this item, we had 2 responses. One person loved it, one person hated it, and there were no comments. So for what that's worth.
All right. Okay. Don't have any public comment cards on this one, so open it up for RAC discussion. Entertain a motion.
I was just going to make the motion to accept as presented.
Okay. Motion by Randy to accept as presented.
I'll second.
Who seconded? Sorry. Ross? Seconded by Ross. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Then we'll call for a vote. Ryan? Yes. Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert? Yes. Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. All right, agenda item number 11. Chad, landowner permit rule R657-43 amendments.
Yeah, so this one is a lot, just dealing with HB 202. So a lot of this we can't change, it's legislated, but there were some areas where we can put criteria in for when we would give some landowner vouchers, and so it just addresses that. And I don't know if there's any questions on that.
Okay, let's start off with questions. Questions from the RAC. Randy?
One, I was actually joking about this earlier. Someone hates you. That you get this kind of stuff. It's just unbelievable. No, I'm not going to rant too much. What you presented that you're able to do, I appreciate you being able to do this. And this is more a comment, but I can't wait until a comment session. I loathe this with the fiery passion. We just we're not even pretending that wildlife is a public. It's privatized, and it's just going to get worse. was horrible, but thank you for taking care of it since it's dumping you left.
Okay. Any other questions? Any questions from the public? Yeah, come on up. State your name first, please.
Garrett Slatkoff, representing Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I'm not sure if I missed this or if this is ineligible due to the language in the bill, but the permits that the biologists are able to recommend for those landowners with the contiguous acres from 4,000 to 8,999, are those able to go through the public process, or just based on the criteria, do you guys award those and then there's no public input on that at all?
Yeah, correct. That there's public input on the criteria that we're bringing forward, but yeah, ultimately it's a division call on whether to award them or not. I actually have a question if I can come back to it, follow up.
Sure.
On some of that criteria, I'm just curious because it's in the memorandum, it's kind of vague. Like what's defines that their historical contributions to elk habitat or their tolerance for wildlife and property and previous wildlife, sorry, not the previous, but those two things specifically. Like, how are we measuring that to determine that they're eligible for that? Yeah, it's not super objective. There's a lot of subjectivity in these, and really a lot of what we're going off of is if we've been struggling with a landowner, if there's just been a lot of conflict with them not tolerating wildlife, then it's going to be a lower number. If it's somebody that we have a really good relationship with, that they tolerate, they want wildlife, then we can be a little bit more generous, I guess, on those. So yeah, admittedly, it is subjective.
Any other questions? All right. I'm going to summarize public comments on this agenda item.
Yeah, so we had 3 responses on this agenda item. One of those somewhat agreed and then 2 strongly disagreed. That was weighted average of 2. The one comment we did get was someone who just doesn't like the program itself. They didn't like the permits rule onto private landowners and thought those should be given to you.
Okay, thank you. And no public comment cards on this agenda item, so we'll move to RAC discussion. Go ahead, Randy.
There's not much we can say. I mean, this is what it is. I just to say, I need to say something every time anyway.
That's fine.
But there's really nothing we can act on. And we've been handed a pile of stuff and we have to live with it.
I'm going to throw my 2 cents into, because there isn't much we can do. I will say, luckily, what it was versus what it ended up after it went through the Senate was significantly better than what it was looking like. I hate that we just find sometimes that we want to have this whole process in the state that we talk about to go through and discuss these things. And then we get some people that I feel like just don't like it. So I'm just going to go take it to my politician and I'll push it through to get what I want. And we have people that talk and represent. I talk to my own local politicians and they don't know what's going on. They don't hunt. And so they just go, well, hey, these people are speaking and they say that's what they want. And so they pass it. And not myself, but the public in general, the hunting public, it's not the right way to go. I don't like it, but I will also understand this has been a sensitive, touchy topic for a long time. Like I get landowner challenges and things like that. But there's ways to help alleviate those problems. Again, I don't know that there's ever going to be a perfect solution on this. So from what it could have been to what it ended up, I guess we'll take it somewhat as a win, but I myself can't draw a tag and then go sell it off for thousands of dollars. And I thought that was law kind of in this state that are public, that you can't do that. Yet we're going to give a special exemption to people that own their land. Here's this tag and you get to go, you can use it or go sell it for what you want. And if they want to use it, that's one thing. I can understand that, but to get to go turn around and sell it, that part I don't agree with.
Just want to echo what Ross and Randy said.
Any other discussion from the RAC?
I just find myself grateful for the flexibility that the division has to deal with it, as was just explained a few minutes ago, given the fact that we've got the system, we've got what we got. I don't know how you would objectify it more, to be honest with you.
Okay. With that, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we do accept the landowner permit rule R 657-43 amendments as presented by the division.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Robert, seconded by Steve to accept the landowner permit rule amendments as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
I can't abstain, so yes.
Okay. Casey?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. On to agenda item number 12. Expo rule amendments. Toby Jones. This meeting's moved along great. I don't know why we started at 5.
Seriously. All right, Mr. Chair, members of the RAC, thanks for letting us be here.
Okay, anything you want to start off with or clarifications or anything?
No, just, one of the things that I heard time and time again is when I brought around the conservation permit rule a year ago is, well, what I heard is, well, we should have a special draw. Instead of just having all these tags auctioned, we should have a special draw. And in the back of my mind, it was, well, we have that. We have both in Utah. We have a special draw and we have conservation permits. And so the expo permits, so this rule is actually the expo permit rule. And so it doesn't have as much to do with the actual expo as it does with how we administer these permits, where the funding goes and what happens. And so we are coming up on another request for proposals to hold the expo. Okay, and so that'll go out sometime this spring. When that goes out, the reason why we're changing this rule now is because whoever applies for that, we want them to know they're applying under this new rule. And so we tried to provide a little bit more flexibility in pricing. The permits were $5 before. Now we're recommending that they be between $5 and $10. And also in the expo contract that we have with the group that has it now, so SFW and MDF, it is specified that that money has to go back to Utah Wildlife in the contract, but that's never been in the rule before. And it's something we felt like we wanted to tighten up and have in the rule so that any group applying for this knows that yes, you can keep some for the administration, 20%. It's more than what you keep if you are doing a conservation permit. And it's also less than other draws across the West. When I looked into this again, a lot of draws are taking 30 to 35% to run. So saying you can keep 20% to administer the draw, but everything else has to go back to Utah Wildlife in one way or another. There's a couple different ways, but in one way or another, it's going back to Utah Wildlife. So, yeah, I think those are the main changes. Other small things, how we account for the permits. I think it's the most complicated thing in the world. When the rule was originally written, it said that they couldn't be additional permits. And basically what that means is that everything DAX just took through are public draw permits. And since there can't be any additional permits, we then, after those get approved by the board, go back and take the expo permits out of that total before we send it to the draw contractor, which just ends up being completely confusing. we can account for them in advance, just like we do conservation permits. So we account for every permit, but we're not taking anything out before we start the draw. I think that's an explanation. Added the ability to add SWAN if it's something we want to do down the road, and heightened up the funding and some good changes here. So I guess because it is confusing, the old rule will stay in place. It will stay in place through 2026 because that's when the contract ends. But applying this spring, they'll understand that they're applying under the new rule.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So start with questions from RAC members.
Someone else has got to ask a question.
Goodness, Mangus. Good one, Avery. The kind that you can legally harvest in Utah.
So on the SWAN zone, one of my questions is on that. Little off topic, but it's still in the same area. Can SWAN permits be considered to be ethical conservation tax as well?
So we've looked in, it doesn't work for conservation. Blair can probably speak to this better than I can actually, but when we've looked into it, it wouldn't work as a conservation permit. Do you want to touch on why, Blair?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to a lot of the rules that are in the federal government because they're a federally managed species. And so it goes back to the permit having to be issued specifically to the person purchasing it. And because of that, when it goes through a bidding type process, it doesn't qualify, but it does through this process. So it's hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and I didn't want to get too far, of course. And this other question, I'll admit it's out of laziness. I didn't take the time to look at the current rule. Are these percentages changing, or are they still the same percentages?
No, they are different. So I can do a breakdown of that really quickly if you'd like me to. So what we're proposing, the way it works now is that the group administering the expo has to turn in a detailed amount of what it costs, detailed receipts. And we looked over time and it's been about 20% for their costs to put on the drawing. Sometimes as high as like 21, 22%, as low as like 19%. And so we said, okay, instead of doing all of that, let's say that it can't cost any more than 20%. They can keep 20% to administer whatever it takes to run it and just get rid of that. Then after that, the way it is now, so about 80% now is divided up, and this is just in the contract, not in the rule, that $1.50 goes to Utah Wildlife in a cooperative agreement, and that $3.50 goes to Utah Wildlife at the discretion of the contractor. This is a little different. So what we're saying is after the 20%, the 80% you have left, 10% comes back to the division automatically. Kind of like internal conservation permit funds, where we can apply that to survey flights, match for research projects, things like that. And then 70% then comes back to Utah Wildlife, and that's divided into two pots. Instead of being 150, 350 now, we're recommending a 50-50 split of 35% comes back to Utah Wildlife in a cooperative agreement, and 35% comes back to Utah Wildlife at the discretion of the group. But both of those, or all of that, is audited. And so all of that has to be presented annually at the audit of this is how this money benefited Utah Wildlife. Yep.
Any other questions from RAC members? Casey, did you have your hand raised?
I do, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Kobe, one of the questions I had for your new boss before he was your boss, I'm hearing some discussion from groups like Pheasants Forever and others about looking at maybe doing a draw opportunity to hunt upland birds on places like Antelope Island. I know we're not talking specifically about that within the context of this recommendation, but has that discussion come up at all, and can we facilitate that anyway?
Yeah, so you're asking me to remember something that we, Casey, after we had the discussion about the Antelope Island MOU, and this will be coming around in the next RAC, is the new proposed Antelope Island MOU. We left that, we did leave the door open for the opportunity to have like a chucker hunt on the island. We didn't go into the details of what that would look like, but we did add. You asked me to remember something that was done.
Well, and the only reason I'm asking it within the context of this recommendation is just that would be sort of a conservation tag style draw option that you could potentially offer for wildlife finding. That's why I'm asking it now rather than that other meeting.
Yes, I think that is in my mind, that is what model we would, a model like that we would use to determine an opportunity like that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I think we should do it just to keep pushing the issue so that people will leave me alone in my capacity. I'm bothering you. So
I love the idea. So you don't have to convince me.
This is something rough up. Is it possible to get up?
As a conservation permit. So that's in as a conservation permit currently. I mean, there are upland species, right? There are turkey. There is nothing that would legally prohibit an upland species from being a conservation permit species. That most of them are not currently listed. Sage grouse used to be, and they pulled them. It just wasn't working very well. You have to talk in the mic or you're going to get in trouble. Just like
two that would potentially work are sage grouse and shark tail. Could those be included? And I know if we're going too far afield, this meeting comes fast.
Man, who would thought
those would be the ones that could be added to conservation tags, and that would open up a lot of other opportunities.
I would add chuckers on antelope. You get a lot of people that would, I think.
Yeah, no, that would be a special opportunity. Yeah, and I wouldn't argue against that. And Kobe knows why I'm asking.
I know exactly why you're asking it. I think it's something we'd be open to exploring. We don't have it slated to change right now. So, but I don't know that there's like this complete opposition to it either. And I understand the sentiment and why it would mean something to a lot of folks. And when you have something as a conservation permit species, it opens up the opportunity for a lot of funding, research, and other things for that species. So, yep, I get it.
So, just why I'm talking about it, would you please bring that up at the board meeting? Mm-hmm. I would love to see the opportunity of those species to handle work like an handle.
Okay.
Sorry, went down that rabbit hole.
You're good. Anything else on the expo permit rules?
Any other questions from RAC members on the expo permits rule change? Any questions from the public? Garrett?
Garrett Slutkoff, representing Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I think you kind of already answered my question here, but it sounds like the funds spent by the contractor that goes through the audit process to make sure that it did. Is there a report of anything that you guys currently put out, like that's made to the public to show how that goes? All right, cool, thanks.
Yeah, and just to answer that on the record, that's posted on the website annually, and you can go through and see where those funds were spent. So a lot of transparency in that program and the other programs, the conservation permit program, and we like it that way. That's the way it should be.
That audit usually comes through in the August board cycle, right? It doesn't come to the RACs, but it does to the board, correct?
Yeah, the audits usually go directly to the board, but they're then posted on the website, and anybody can get on there, download them, read them, and feel free to call and ask questions. Like call me or Kenny Johnson, or we can help you out or point you in the right direction.
All right. Summarize public comments on this agenda item.
Okay, so we had 4 responses on this agenda item. 75% of the people strongly agreed. One person somewhat disagreed. So that was an average of 4.3. one comment we did, with someone who's, I guess comments in general were strongly agreed and disagreed. The one thing that was there was someone saw the $5 fee. They wanted to see, or didn't like to see that increased potentially up to $10 and making it anywhere from 5 to 10, like was proposed.
Okay, thank you. We have one comment card for public comment on this agenda item. That's Troy Justinson.
Wake up, everybody. Troy Justinson, Sports, Fish, and Wildlife. First, I wanted to say thanks. Obviously, as Cody mentioned, that we've had the contract for the last 10 years, I believe it was, and what a great blessing to our organization. And quite frankly, I believe it's a great blessing to sportsmen in Utah. And I'll explain why here in just a minute. But I do want to clarify a few things. I mean, we're calling these expo tags, but they're really the 200 permits. Whoever gets the bid in the future does not get the expo. The expo is totally separate. The 200, the expo is just for the 200 permits where it's conducted, the draw takes place. So that they are two separate things. Speaking on conservation permits, I'm going to date myself here. Swans used to be a conservation tag back in the early days, and then it changed. You know, I don't know what the rule is now, but in the early days of the conservation permits, there was swan tags there. And just to give a little elaboration on, the old structure, the 350 and the 150. The 150 restricted basically means, like conservation permits, in order for us as a group to spend that money, we have to have a cover sheet from the division. It has to be an approved project. The 350 gives us little bit more latitude. That as long as it goes towards mission accomplishment or whatever, we don't have to have necessarily buyout from the division. Let me tell you how important that is. The majority of the money that SFW brings in from this, and another important part is this. Remember this, it's the application fee that the monies we're keeping. We don't keep the permit money, anything else. It's the same thing as what you're paying to Fallon, Nevada, except that money now doesn't go into the pocket of a private individual. It stays here for the benefit of Utah's wildlife. What SFW has done with that money, probably the biggest area that we spent that money is expanding our footprint into waterfowl and upland game. Through the monies that I guarantee we spend over $1 million towards game and pheasants and whatever else type deal. And you just go talk to our waterfowl managers and ask them the millions that we put into waterfowl with those expo funds. So truly grateful for that opportunity. If we get it in the future, or whoever gets, I hope that they will continue to do that. Because right now we cannot use conservation permit money to go into upland game and to waterfowl units because it has to go into the game species, whatever. So what a great program. Like I said, so grateful that we've had it. It's been good for us, and I believe it's been good for Utah. So we support the division's recommendations and moving forward with these. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Okay, we'll open it up for RAC discussion.
I thought the meeting was going to go, but I'll go instead. No, I've been on the Habitat Council for 4 years now, and I see a lot of this money being spent in the background. We don't get to see it in the Habitat Council, but we watch our, what would you say? Well, I'm 2 million in the hole, Randy. You're 200,000 in the hole on Upland. I'm the big game rep on there, and that was a lot bigger last week before the sportsman group took a bunch of it. So awesome deal, and just love to see it, and super excited to see it continue.
I'm going to chime in. I'll be honest. There's things about the expo that I love. There's things about the expo that I struggle with, but overall it does a ton of good for the state. There's no, and I actually learned this. I was watching a televised presentation a little bit. A couple people here were on it. I knew Utah was a leader in habitat. We crush. Nobody comes near what Utah does for habitat and wildlife. In any of the matter of fact, none of the Western states combined do as much work as we do as a state in habitat, and that's because of the expo and the conservation. So as much as I struggle with some things, the good vastly outweighs some of the struggles that I have. And I don't know, is the figure public yet from the EPC meeting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'll share it. So with Expo money and conservation tag money, $6.6 million was spent on habitat for this year. That's just a ton of money. That's what these types of programs do. So I'm an advocate. I like cleaning it up. I don't think these are major changes. I think it's more housekeeping. But it's a good program.
I like that some of the stuff's becoming official rule more than just through the contract. I do have a little bit of heartburn just on the increase. I can understand, especially like once in a lifetime, but it's also, those are Utah public tags and they're open to anybody in the world that shows up that wants to put in that money. And so sometimes I'm like, well, I'm open to the increase, but I don't know that I love it for the Utah citizen, but I also, it's going to conservation. So I'm kind of like, yeah, a little bit torn one way and the other. But yeah.
I'll make you feel a little better, Ross. Because of those funds and giving up those tags, we now have a couple different new sheep herd, desert sheep herds. We have new bison herds in the state, new goat herds in the state. So in my opinion, it's worth it, in the long run.
Yeah, I can echo a lot of things. There's always shared opinions in the public with conservation permits, but especially the expo permits. But we're able to do some pretty interesting projects with a lot of benefit across the board, not just to specific species, but it also gives a lot of latitude to the conservation groups as well as the division to be able to pull off some things that a lot of other states really don't have that option in front of us. So it does become a sacrifice, honestly, for the public hunter, 200 permits, but that's a reinvestment opportunity is what it is for the state as a whole. We've seen a lot, up here to Troy's Point in northern Utah with the waterfowl habitat, with the upland opportunities that have come about. And so it's an interesting position that we get in for the state of Utah and the conservation groups to be able to figure out where to spend the money and start cutting checks rather than hoping that we can kind of drum up some money to get some projects done. So.
Yeah, and it's a good program. It really leverages a lot of money that we can use on public lands and private lands. And I don't know if anybody's done the accounting on it, but if you did and looked at the number or the population increases from the habitat work, you probably exceed the number that are taken out for the draw.
Any other comments from RAC members? Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the rule amendments as proposed.
A second.
Okay, motion by Ross, seconded by Avery to accept the expo rule amendments as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Avery?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Ross?
Yes.
Motion passing unanimous. Okay, that is the final agenda item for tonight. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, turn the paper over. Okay. It's the last action item for tonight. All right. We have a couple informational items that apply to the northern region for tonight. Let's start off with the Cinnamon Creek WMA Habitat Management Plan. Melissa Early.
Good evening. I'm Melissa Early, the Habitat Manager. I was previously the impact analysis biologist, so part of these Cinnamon Creek, many committee meetings and part of this habitat management plan process. And I have one correction I'd like to make for my presentation. So when I talked about Cinnamon Creek being the amazing confluence of sage grouse, rough grouse, dusky grouse, and sharptail habitat, I mentioned a sign that's in the parking lot, and I wanted to clarify that yes, you can hunt sharptail with a permit.
Okay. All right, thank you. This is just an informational item here. We have any questions from RAC members?
I do. Can I come to Cinnamon Creek with you guys? That's the first question. The second is, I think you talked about the goals of WMAs and like, I just wondered if you have metrics that go with that. You kind of have this goal of like increasing recreation and habitat. I can't remember all of it. Maybe you can tell us that, but are there metrics? Like, how do you measure that? Good question, Jamie. And yes, you can definitely visit, and maybe you can help us with some of the habitat restoration projects, like building BDAs, wildlife friendly fencing, and all. So, to answer your question, I mean, the wildlife management areas are managed for wildlife and wildlife habitat. And Cinnamon Creek in particular is really unique because it's got really important summer range for big game. And then also it supports upland species in Bonneville cutthroat trout, pure strain Bonneville cutthroat trout in the creek. And so, like, I mean, we're trying to manage it to restore areas where habitat was degraded in the past. We're trying to address invasive species, work on both upland areas and riparian areas. And so, I mean, over time, by like seeing how conditions are changing on the ground, based on implementing projects and, keeping track of like, hopefully we're able to eradicate some invasive species. And then with our wildlife friendly fences, using information like from Wildlife Tracker, hopefully we're able to see like more movement. So it's, I guess, a combination of looking at things on the ground and then on the computer as well. But you don't really have like thresholds, like we're trying to achieve this water quality, or I don't know. I know this is something that I hear often about Utah, is that we're really great at making plans, but maybe not having like thresholds or like actionable items of like, oh, we're going to do this next. So that's why I was asking that question. And thank you. Sure. And I mean, also species of greatest conservation need are monitored on the WMA. In the document, we talk about the 2025 Wildlife Action Plan, and I mean, looking at species, habitats, and continuing to hopefully get more into metrics.
I've got a question on just how they came to the decision on roads and access. It again kind of doesn't seem, obviously the dates that you can access is during the hunting season, but we talk about protecting habitat, protecting wildlife, and I think some of the most damage I see done to habitat, unfortunately, is during the hunting season, especially if you get weather on those roads and different things like that. And a lot of people feel that if they can drive an ATV or UTV somewhere, that they take it where they want to go. So anyways, kind of the mindset behind how you came to those dates and those decisions.
Sure. So we had a collaborative stakeholder committee of 11 different representatives, and we met 4 times and really had robust discussions about the importance of this summer range habitat and meeting the goals of having access and opportunity while protecting, protecting resources at the same time. So that's how we landed on that long motorized closure period from November 15th through August 9th. So it was really ultimately, through various negotiations, kind of landed on that as a group.
I'll admit, one of the things I was pleased at is I was shocked that the roads were closed as long as they were, because there's significant pressure from the county and other sources to keep those roads open. So I was really pleased on that motorized vehicle closure portion of it. One thing I'll throw out, and I know it's a compromise that needs to be made, but in principle, I hate camping on WMAs. They're wildlife management areas. They're for the benefit of the wildlife. Recreation is not one of the criteria. And I know it's a compromise. So this isn't a shot at you. It's just something that has to be done. But I harp on this on the Habitat Council, so I'm not going to miss the chance to say it here. We've got to learn from our past mistakes on these WMAs and prevent recreational use. I mean, there's multiple WMAs that they're not WMAs. 10th and August WMA is covered in bike trails and hiking trails. And it's supposed to be a winter event. And it's literally useless at this point. And we can't crawl it back because for so many years it's been allowed. And I know that's why we're allowing camping for a limited time period up here, because camping's been allowed forever when Sitla owned the land. So I'm glad, I'm happy for the compromises that were made. And overall, I'm really thrilled with the plan that took a long time to get together. And I'm really glad it was there, or is there now. And I hope there's various enforcement keeping the private property owners off it that are using it for easements. So I hope that's something that.
Thanks, Randy.
Casey, you got your hand raised?
Yeah, and my phone might die, so I may lose this. But as a member of the working group that tried to kind of navigate this compromise, I'd like the board to know that the division did a really good job landing this thing. And in full disclosure, this isn't what I wanted, and I feel like I've been as involved in this WMA as anybody. But the alternative would have been far worse. So I'm glad we were able to land in the middle. Just so the RAC knows. This took a long time, and I think ends up in a place that made everybody happy and unhappy at the same time.
Thanks, Casey. Any other questions, RAC members on this WMA? All right, it's just an informational, so there's no action to be taken from our side. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Swan Creek WMA Habitat Management Plan. Zach Ullman.
Yeah, so my name is Zach Oman. I'm a habitat biologist for the Northern Region. This was a revision of a 10-year-old plan for the Swan Creek WMA. We like to revisit and revise those on a 10-year cycle. And so that's kind of where we're at with this one. It was, although we do have other WMAs that are at that point, this was a high priority for us with the increase in development around the property, increase of year-round use of the WMA. And so we wanted to get ahead of that before we got behind the ball on it. So the big changes you'll see are to the access management plan or portion of the plan, which is just addressing or establishing a seasonal closure as well as motor vehicle restrictions on the WMA.
Thank you. Any questions from RAC members on this one?
I liked what you did with it. The restrictions that you put in place is trying to keep things reasonable. I thought you did a good job.
Thank you.
Just one comment from the Forest Service. We look at a lot of the WMAs have access through onto the forest. So it'd be great to have a little bit more involvement with the division and the Forest Service and kind of planning that recreational access in the trails.
Noted. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think that one, given the location it's at and the amount of development going around there, I think the enforcement will obviously take a front seat when needed. So with the closures anyway. Okay. Anything else from RAC members? All right. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Now with that, that's the last agenda item for tonight. So entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Randy.
I'll second it.
Second by Jamie. Any opposed? You can stay. So, thank you.
You should stay.